Hey, hello and welcome everyone to this webinar on how to write a successful teaching case. We thank you very much for joining us for this session, which promises to be very educational, very helpful if you are looking to write a teaching case. My name is Melissa Close. I am the cases commissioning lead at Emerald Publishing based in Boston, and I am joined by our primary speaker, Christopher Craig, Associate Professor at Murray State University and the Editor-in-Chief of the Case Journal. And also one of our partners on our competition, Teja Dusak, who will be speaking briefly about this CEEMAN competition as an upcoming opportunity for you to potentially get involved with. So to start this session, I'm just going to briefly walk us through some housekeeping, and I'll share my screen. So hopefully you can all see this slide now. I'm just going to hop right into this brief overview of how GoToWebinar works. So as you may have noticed, you will have a control panel, which typically appears on the right-hand side of your screen. To pop this out and or collapse it, you can use the orange arrow to do so. Please note that you will be muted for the duration of this presentation, but you are able to change your audio if you're having any sound problems by going to that particular tab on the control panel. You can switch to your computer, your phone, or whatever device you'd like to use. While you are muted, you do have access to the chat functionality and the Q&A section. So please do send any questions and comments through there. And at the end of the presentation, we're going to have a Q&A section for about 15 minutes, where we'll try to get through as many of those as we possibly can. This presentation will be recorded and shared with you afterwards via email. So look out for that within the next couple of days. So to provide a little context on why Emerald organizes this webinar series, at Emerald, we are very happy and proud to provide a case study collection of nearly 3,000 cases. Everything we do is very much focused on quality and relevance to help instructors use cases and authors to write cases that are relevant to real-world situations and challenges. We cover the full spectrum of business and management topics, from marketing to accounting and finance and strategy, and everything we do, we focus on providing very high quality, double-blind peer review, and over 95% of our content has teaching notes. We are very much a global organization with offices all over the world. And in 2022, our cases were downloaded by about 105,000 people around the world. Our case journal and our emerging markets case studies collection are both indexed in Scopus, which I think speaks towards their rigor and the standards they uphold as publications. And we partner with organizations around the world to provide opportunities to authors to hone their craft, get published, and get recognized for their work. And one of the main ways we do this is through competitions, which focus on different topics or different regions to promote those authors and those stories in the field. So on that note, I'm actually going to hand over to Teja now to speak about one such competition that we will be holding this year in one of our publications, the Emerging Markets Case Studies Collection. So Teja, hopefully you can take it from here.
Thank you, Melissa. Warm welcome to everyone joining us today, also from my side. My name is Teja Dusak, and I am project manager at CEEMAN. Maybe I would like to start just with a few sentences about what CEEMAN is and how we are connected to case writing. CEEMAN was established 31 years ago as a management development association focusing mostly on Central and Eastern Europe. This is also where the first three letters of our name come from, CEE. We are located in Slovenia, and our headquarters, so to say, is in beautiful Bled, overseeing the Lake Bled that you can also see on the picture. Over the years, we grew, developed, and we are now a global association with over 170 members from 50 countries. Most of our members are universities and business schools, but also individuals and companies. We also have exchange partnerships with other associations. We focus mostly on the faculty development. We organize educational programs for deans, for faculty, for staff. We organize international conferences, events, and we also hold regular free online webinars on different topics. We have our own accreditation. We accredit business schools, and our accreditation is called CEEMAN Equa, which you have already heard of, I guess. We also do joint research projects, publications, and very important, we also do competitions and awards. Now I would like to ask Melissa to go to the next slide. The reason we are all here today is to learn and get familiar with the case writing competition. This is actually one of our longest running activities. We started in 1996. We are very happy to say that since 2007, we are running it together with Emerald Publishing as our partner. The aim of this competition is to promote the creation and the usage of local cases, focusing mostly on emerging markets. It is really important for every part of the world to have the local cases, focusing on the local context, and it's very important for the emerging markets also. Here we want to make an impact, and that is the reason why we have launched this competition years ago. The competition has monetary and non-monetary prizes. There are also publication opportunities with Emerald, which is a great way to make your work more visible. Let me present a bit more the non-monetary prizes that are offered by CEEMAN. Next slide, please, Melissa. The first thing is the CEEMAN Annual Conference. We organize the conference every year, and each year it is located in different country. This year, we are excited to announce that the conference will be held in Austria in September, but we will be revealing the exact location shortly. Also, the winners of the case writing competition be invited to join at this conference and to receive their awards there in person. The second thing that is part of the award is a scholarship for our flagship faculty development program called IMTA, which stands for International Management Teachers Academy. For this program, we get great feedbacks every year. It has earned one of the top spots among the best faculty development programs around the world. We launched it in year 2000, and since then we have educated over 6,500 educators from 50 countries around the world. IMTA focuses mostly on improving teaching skills, the materials, and methods. What is really important is that it focuses on teaching with cases. We organize it annually, and usually it takes place in June, which is also the case for the upcoming one, which will be held in June in Bled here in Slovenia. The winners of this competition will receive scholarship for this program. The first place gets a full scholarship, and the second and third place receive partial scholarships. Now, on my last slide, you can see my email, and please feel free to contact me with any questions related to this competition, IMTA, annual conference, or any other CEEMAN activity. Thank you so much for attention. So now I would like to hand over to Melissa.
Great, thank you so much, Teja, for sharing that information on the CEEMAN competition and organization. And just to reiterate, I won't linger here too long because you've touched on it so well already, but this opportunity is a great chance to participate within the case community and get recognized for your work. Our submission deadline will be April 15th, but more importantly, I wanted to emphasize the opportunity to get early feedback for this competition. So our early bird deadline is February 29th. And if you participate in this, which is entirely optional, you will get feedback from our lead judge. And that might help you prepare for the final submission deadline of April 15th in order to improve your chances of being one of the winning cases. So we look forward to receiving your submissions to the CEEMAN competition if you have something ready to go by February or April. And in addition to the CEEMAN competition, we have one other opportunity coming up, and this is the Case for Women, which is run through the Case Journal. Now, this competition was founded in response to research that found that only about 11% of award-winning cases featured female protagonists. So that spoke to a need to address this gap in the literature, and hence the Case for Women was born. So if you're looking to participate in this competition, there are a few requirements you should be aware of. The main priority is that this case or your submission should feature a female protagonist. So we have something called the Simons test that we use to measure this. Leslie Simons was our founder a few years ago, and she is still active in the competition. And she has coined this kind of similar to the Bechdel test, if you're familiar with that term in movies. So we were looking to see, does the case have a woman in it? Is she the protagonist? And does she speak to another woman about the business at some point in the case narrative? In addition to those requirements, we love to see a mix of gender across the case. So to that end, we love to see pronouns included for all characters to help us identify that. In terms of industries covered, you can speak on any discipline you are interested in writing in, but in terms of industries, we are encouraging authors, if possible, to write outside of what we call the 4 Fs, which are food, family, furniture, and fashion. And that is only because when we look at the literature, we see that the majority of representation for female protagonists is already in these 4 spaces. So we are just hoping to expand beyond that into other industries as well, because we know women are present in other industries, so let's see them recognized there too. But as I mentioned, this is not a requirement. So if you are working in the industries of food, family, fashion, or friends, or femme, you're very welcome to participate still. And then we also encourage a discussion of gender in the teaching note as well. So the competition deadline for this one will be 30th of April of this year, and this will be in the Case Journal, which, similar to the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection, is a Scopus indexed publication. And if you submit to this and you are a winner, fantastic. And if you are not a winner, both will be considered for publication either way. And this is my last slide, but I just wanted to end on some resources. If you leave this presentation feeling very motivated and are looking for more resources to help you with your writing, all of these guides are very helpful. They lay out instructions to do so. So we do have a How to Write a Teaching Case guide available for free on our website. We also have the Emerald Cases Hub, which is an online platform where you can register for an entirely free course that will walk you through the beginning and the end of the writing process. And if you're working in the compact guide or the compact case format, which for Emerald is anything under 3,000 words, so quite concise, we also have a book guiding you through how to write a compact case successfully, available for purchase on our bookstore. And at the bottom of the slide is just my contact information if you'd like to reach out with any questions or comments or concerns you may have. And that wraps up my section of the presentation. So I will hand over to Chris to talk about how to actually write a teaching case.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank Emerald and Melissa for having me come on and talk today, and just highlight really the how great it is that we do have a couple of these case competitions. It's really a great way, having sat in the editor seat for a couple of years, going on my 2nd year now, to get motivated to write cases. And we really see a lot of interesting cases about women and through the CEEMAN competition over with Emerging Markets Case Studies. I also want to thank the attendees for taking the time to come listen to us today, and hopefully we will find this to be useful. And so there are books, as Melissa said, and conferences and tons of resources out there. So I'm not going to teach you how to write a case study completely, but I am hoping to give you a few tips to get started, look at a few of the pitfalls, and hopefully provide some information from novice to expert to help with your craft. And so before I do move on, though, I do want to highlight that I am the editor of the Case Journal, and we're very hopeful that you will develop the cases and send it to either the Case Journal for review or out to Emerging Markets Case Studies if you fall into one of those country contexts that Teja was talking about earlier. So Melissa. And so just to start with the introduction is to look at some of our motivations for writing cases. And so 2 of the reasons that I've come up with writing cases are materials for courses. And so if you have those learning deficiencies that are in your courses, or if you have maybe some content deficiencies, cases are really great ways to address some of those gaps. One of the articles that has recently been published on the AACSB site is titled "Peer-Reviewed Cases as Intellectual Contributions," and it's a very nice article written. There's a shout out to the Case Journal and a few other peer-reviewed teaching case journals about how these are increasingly being used for AACSB accreditation as intellectual contributions. And more schools are also accepting cases through the peer-reviewed process for promotion and tenure. And so there is, above and beyond just writing those materials for those classes, there's organizational benefits to writing cases, and also those personal benefits when it's coming to progression of our careers. And so this is a great way, if you haven't gotten into case writing, maybe one of those reasons to motivate you to do so. In terms of my background and where I'm coming from, I got into case writing out of necessity. And so I was lucky enough back in 2017 to win a grant, had tons and tons of learning objectives and goals about student outcomes, and realized once we got funded, I didn't have any idea of how those materials were going to be developed. And so I discovered the case method. I published my first case in the Case Journal back in 2019. Quickly became a reviewer for the Case Journal, editorial board member, associate editor, and finally the editor-in-chief starting in last year. And so to date, I've got, I believe, 7 peer-reviewed case studies out there, 2 more in review. Some of my other background in case writing has been with regards to assurance of learning for AACSB. And so this is kind of twofold. The first fold is if you're looking for those measures, case studies are a great way for us to assess learning. And so if you haven't thought about this, or if you're looking for some tools to gauge learning, the case collection with the Case Journal Emerging Markets Case Studies is pretty broad. We have a lot of topics, a lot of objectives, and there's very likely content out there for your accreditation needs and also your classroom needs. Also, this gives you an opportunity to potentially write cases, and I have written and now published cases for assurance of learning purposes. And so if there's a specific thing that you're looking to teach about, or you want your students to learn, this may give you an opportunity to not only to write the instrument to grab that information to evaluate the students, but also to get one of those peer-reviewed publications, ideally, that again speak to AACSB accreditation and intellectual contributions, as well as your own journey toward promotion and tenure. So next slide, please. And so now that we've given a little bit of an introduction, I want to lead with learning objectives. And so this is how I got my start, and this is one of the pieces of advice that I give case writers from novice to expert, and that it's a good idea to start with what you want your students to learn. And so a good first step in designing learning objectives is looking for the gaps. And so this could be teaching gaps, this could be learning gaps, as I mentioned before, if there are learning deficiencies. And so some of us are engaged in management education research where we're doing evaluation of classes. If we're evaluating our classes for individual purposes or education purposes or even accreditation purposes, we want to be able to identify these gaps and then craft learning objectives that speak directly towards those student needs or those programmatic needs. Learning gaps also, as I mentioned before, you may have content gaps. And so if there's goals that your institution is looking to meet, or if there are accreditation goals that you have, there's content gaps that aren't being covered, this is a great way to engage in case writing as well. This is a great way to include those gaps within your learning objectives. One of the more recent cases that I published was about ethics. Reason being, when we were going through accreditation cycle, we realized in the MBA program at Murray State, we didn't have the best coverage on the topic of ethics. And so looking at the gaps that we had, I was able to turn those into learning objectives and then build out a case around those objectives. And so I usually will start with the learning objectives. These aren't written in stone. These are probably going to change as you write the case, as you assess your student needs, especially as you're teaching the case once it gets developed and implemented. These may change, but it's a good place to start. The second point on learning objectives and how to write these is I often will use and refer others to use the Bloom's revised taxonomy. So there's 6 levels. This goes from remember to create, from lower levels to higher levels, toward higher level and critical thinking. And so some points when you're looking at Bloom's and using this to write your learning objectives is, first and foremost, we want to try to start at the lower levels, so level 1, and work your way toward the higher levels of thinking. One of the things that we routinely see are more than one verbs and more than one object. And so make sure that these things aren't double-barreled. And so if you've got 2 or 3 verbs, take those out, hash them out, and figure out what you're really trying to get to. And so you don't want to have more than one verb, called double-barreled. You don't want to have more than one object when you're writing these objectives. Also, oftentimes in our classes, we want to have analyze is a big one. We want to analyze a lot of different things, right? But in teaching cases, we're looking for progression toward higher level thinking. And so you want to try to shy away from the over-reliance on a single level of learning objective. And so analyze, 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 that's going to raise a red flag in that you're at one level and you aren't really progressing students through the design of your learning objectives. And so as you're writing the learning objectives, this is what we want our students to accomplish. And so this should correspond with the case body. And so as an editor, one of the first things, or the first thing that I look at when I'm getting a case is the learning objectives. And then I'll look and see, does this correspond with the content of the case body? And so is there enough information in the case body to address their learning objectives? Also, one of the things I'm looking at is there redundant or information that maybe not necessary in the case body that's going to detract from the learning objective. And so a few of the questions you want to ask as you have your objectives and when you're writing your case or you're done with your case is, okay, what matches with the learning objectives? Can this case be taught to these learning objectives without an instructor's manual? Is another good question to ask. And so you do want the case to be able to stand alone, especially with the format of the case journal, and that we have the case body, and behind a wall there we have the teaching notes that aren't accessible to only those who register. And so make sure that the case body can stand alone. There's not too much things that aren't in there that are going to detract from your objectives, but you should be able to meet all your objectives in some form or fashion based on the writing of the case body and the narrative of the case body. The second thing that I look at very closely early on when I'm assessing cases are the discussion questions. And are the discussion questions speaking directly to the learning objectives? Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not, but you should be writing those discussion questions in a manner that are pulling content from the case and speak directly toward the learning objectives. And so for those who've been through review recently, probably one of the comments you've heard from me is to go ahead and put LO number whatever in the notation behind the discussion question. So our reviewers, our editor team will be able to see where this is linked. And also when a teacher adopts a case, they know which discussion question speaking to that objective. And so it makes it makes you do a little bit more diligence on the front end to make sure that objectives are aligned with the case and the discussion questions. And it also helps in the back end once instructors are teaching your case so that they know how to navigate the case a little better in the spirit that you wanted it to be taught. And lastly, you want to make sure that your learning objectives are corresponding with academic levels you're prescribing where the case is taught. And so what I mean by this is if I see lower level objectives, so remember, understand, or their first couple levels, if you're teaching this to an intro class in ethics and you're talking about being able to define and remember, justice approach to ethics, that would be fine. That would be a-okay. But if we're talking about doctoral students, we're talking about master's students, you would progress. I would expect more of a progression to the higher levels of learning on the topics that you're covering. So next slide, please. The second point of my presentation is to succinctly summarize. And so this is primarily speaking to the synopsis and intro. I would say these same lessons could be applied throughout the entirety of a case body as well. And so one of the things that you want to look at with these two sections is, are you summarizing your story from front to back? And so as an editor, as a reviewer, as a student that's looking at this case for the first time, you want it to be understandable. You want the student to be able to understand where they're going with this case. This is very, very important for your longer full-length cases that they're going to have quite a bit of time commitment towards. Typically, we'll have teaching plans in our instructor's manuals of about 90 minutes. I know that some of the cases that we're teaching or some of the cases you're adapting are semester long in the way that they're being integrated into the class. And so it really is important for students when they get the case to know where it's going, and also for instructors to know where it's going. I have been into a few cases this week, and one of the points that jumped out to me is simplicity in your first couple of sentences. I've had some struggles with run-on sentences. Yesterday I was looking at a case that had the first sentence I think went for 4 lines. And so there's so many different topics, there's so many different things you're trying to introduce. So really simplify those sentences down. Try to use simple sentences if you can. Avoid the run-ons, try to avoid the compounds even early on, so that this is very succinct and is very understandable. Need to also realize, and Melissa didn't speak to this earlier so explicitly, but our audience is truly worldwide. And so of those 100,000 downloads, I would venture to say that, I mean, we've got a large chunk in Asia, we've got a large chunk in South America, we've got a large chunk in the US. And so think about the audience you're writing towards. We're writing in English, but there may not be the first language for a lot of the students or the instructors who are going to be adapting the cases. And so in terms of the synopsis, this is where you're going to hook your instructor, and this is going to be in the instructor's manual. And this is also going to be on the website. And so this is what others are going to see of your case. And so it really is important in the synopsis to simply and concisely explain this to the instructor from front to back, so that they know what they know that they want to adopt this, and they can easily integrate this into their course in some form or fashion. In terms of the student, this is in the case body introduction. The instructor is going to read this as well. But are they going to say, is this engaging or not? In terms of being able to read this, is this something I can easily read or not? You don't want students to walk away from the introduction asking, why did my instructor do this to me? It should be clear and it should be concise in terms of guiding the student early on and giving them the right expectations with the case. Again, I can't stress this enough. This is your opportunity when you're writing, especially the synopsis is going on the website, to have others engage with your case and to adopt your case. And so it really is important to spend a lot of time here and make sure that you're succinctly summarizing your writing in these 2 areas specifically. So, next slide, please. So now that we've talked about leading with learning objectives, succinctly summarizing, I do want to talk about a few of the common pitfalls that you want to avoid as you're either preparing to write a case or as you're writing a case. And so the first point I want to make is to avoid topics that have been comparably covered. Okay, and so what I mean by this is don't do the same thing over. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't be writing about the same organizations. But if the organization has been written about in the same way you're wanting to write about it, this probably isn't going to be something that's novel or timely. And so do look for different perspectives on how to write about these organizations, especially for secondary, those library cases. There's a lot of information about the Walmarts. If you're in India, Tata Steel is one of those companies that come to mind that has a lot of information out there. So we do want to write about these from a secondary standpoint because the data is there, but do make sure that you're doing your diligence, you're looking at what's published out there, and that you are crafting your own way with the case. We look at this as an editor, look at this. I know our reviewers look at has it's been done before. And so one of the things that you can do to highlight how this is different is use the cover letter to the editor-in-chief. To me, we pass along this to AEs and how you're doing maybe the same context or the same company, but you're doing it in a different way. One of the ways to do this, if you have access to those other cases, is to look at the learning objectives, right? And so what do those other cases want to accomplish with students? What do they want students to accomplish? And what do you want to accomplish? And so you wouldn't want that to be the same in terms of the body. It should be contextually a little bit different. And also in terms of learning objectives, you sure want to make sure that you're approaching this for your own reasons, and that doesn't have that much overlap with other published case studies. The second area, the second common pitfall is poor narrative development. I'm not the best creative writer. I've been told that before in classes and by friends and colleagues. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about here. In terms of narrative development, it should be concise, easy to follow. All the content should be in there that address the learning objectives. Information that should be in the case is there. Information that detracts from the case should be taken out of it. And as I mentioned earlier, we need to think about who we're reading when we're developing the narrative to make sure that we're not overly technical. If we've got non-professional groups, if we've got entry-level students, if we've got students whose English is not the first language, we really need to be cognizant of how we're writing our narratives, and so that is accessible to any of the readers. So you want to make sure that it's developed, all the content's there, you have your characters and your industries developed, but also that it's done in a way that's logical and accessible to wide audiences. One of the biggest issues are missing components or permissions. So if you are writing a case that's based on primary research, make sure to go ahead and get your permissions before you submit. If you're going out to interview someone for the purpose of writing a case, go ahead and on our website, we've got the permissions. Take those with you, have it signed, go ahead and upload so we don't get hung up in the process. Also, this tells our reviewers, this tells our editorial staff that you do have the permissions. This was an interview that took place, and so that verification takes place there. Some of the missing components have to do with the next comment, but engagement with theory, levels of courses, learning objectives. One of the other things that's commonly missing are learning objectives, believe it or not. And so one of the reasons we found that learning objectives are missing is because there are other outlets that have teaching objectives in their instructor's manuals. And so be mindful that at the Case Journal, we're looking only for learning objectives. You could put teaching objectives in your teaching strategy, but teaching objectives, your purpose as a teacher and what you're going to accomplish aren't going to be a substitute for learning objectives. So that's one of the common pitfalls. Lack of engagement with modern literature is another big one. And so I would expect to see, some of the seminal articles referenced, some of the seminal textbooks or textbooks that are widely used. But one of the challenges that we see when we're looking through the instructor's manuals is that there's no engagement with modern literature. And so if you're writing a case and the most recent date on one of your references is 1998, that's not novel. That's probably not going to be timely. And so we do want you to do your diligence as you're writing the case to help us position as instructors who are going to teach these cases within our courses in a more modern context. And so look at ways how you can bring in the modern literature, how you can contribute to that modern literature, and how things that are in the classroom maybe. I know I just wrote with one of our AEs from the Case Journal a case about tipping prompts, because this is a big deal right now, and the ethicality of teaching prompts and how to market tipping prompts at services marketing. And so look for these types of issues, engage with the modern literature, and make sure that the literature is in there. A few other common pitfalls, the entirety of the case body should be in past tense, unless it's something that's in quotes. We're looking for past tense throughout, and so that this is an artifact that's replicable into the future. And so this can be difficult. Sometimes I write about climate change, and so it's weird to write about climate change in the past tense sometimes, but we do need to try to use the literature and how we're writing in past tense to make sure that our cases can go on and have a lot of longevity once we go through the tedious process of writing and getting these things published. Missing references is another big issue. The references need to be in the body of that case to make sure that we're not plagiarizing. In terms of style, some people put APA in body, footnotes, endnotes, or other ways we put the references in there. Make sure that they're there. It should not be assumed that you're using the references, at least at the Case Journal. And so make sure that you're explicitly linking your references to the content you're writing about. And lastly, poor writing quality. This is a peer-reviewed Case Journal that's used oftentimes now for accreditation purposes, for tenure promotion purposes. Our acceptance rates have gotten lower, so they are sub 30%. And so this is an academic outlet, well-respected academic outlet, and the folks that are using these cases as well need to and expect very, very high quality writing. And so if you need English language services, get that done beforehand. And make sure that doesn't prohibit you from going out for review. One of the desk reject prompts that I have is the language sufficient to go out for review? And so that's one of the things that, a button right there is that's being evaluated first and foremost, that we are asking ourselves about the case. And so just be mindful of that. So let's move on to the last slide and then we'll wrap up. And so instead of a traditional conclusion, I wanted to look at a few best practices to help as you are thinking about how to create these cases and also writing these cases and getting them ready for submission. And so the first tip related to poor writing quality, to review the guidelines, author guidelines, and published cases to avoid the desk reject. So you want to make sure that those guidelines are in there, that you're not missing out on anything, that you put all the time and attention into the case when there's going to be something fundamentally missing from a case that's not going to allow it to go out for review. And so do that on your own and also work with your colleagues. And so the second point I have is teach your case and have your colleagues teach your case. This is particularly relevant if you're writing this case with co-authors. And so if there's a couple of you teaching this, you can provide feedback on the case yourself. You can provide feedback to one another. And you can also solicit feedback from students. So students will tell you how the case works, what worked with it, what didn't work with it. And it'll help clear up some of hopefully the writing issues and the clarity issues from above. And so review the guidelines, teach. Another best practice that's not in here, just got a text message from Ismail a second ago, one of the AEs with the case journal, is to sign up as a reviewer. And so you can review for the case journal. You can sign up to review for emerging markets case studies. There are tons of conferences too where you can sign up as a reviewer. And so signing up as a reviewer gives you experience going through those technical requirements and assessing others' technical requirements and how they roll those into a case, and that will help develop your case writing craft. And lastly, I would encourage you, so we've reviewed the guidelines, we've written this case, we've taught it, we've had our colleagues teach it before, we're reviewing. Now we're going to take our case to conferences. And so we can submit these conferences, have them roundtable. The sponsoring organization for the case journal is the Case Association. The conference is in coordination with the Eastern Academy of Management each year. This year it's in Rhode Island in May. So this is a great place to learn about cases, also to have your case reviewed. And there's a hackathon where cases are created on the spot there as well. So that's a great resource in terms of timing. I think the submission window for the case to be reviewed may be gone, but there are other benefits from the conference, different development workshops and things that you could participate in there as well. The second thing, and this is kind of new, this is in review, a professional development workshop in review. It has been on the Academy of Management, the main conference agenda for the last 17 years. So I would expect this to make it this year. One of the additions to the Management Education and Learning Writers Workshop is going to be me. And so the Case Journal is going to be working with this PDW to take and develop cases at a roundtable format. And so you'll be able to look into this professional development workshop once the decisions are made, fingers crossed. That's the one caveat, but submit your cases. That'll give me a chance to look through your cases and then meet up at the conference there where we can roundtable workshop those in preparation for a submission to the Case Journal. And so those are two really great things. There are other case conferences out there. You may have different colleagues that you're working with, but absolutely, if you want to engage in case writing, make sure you know what goes into them. Make sure you're familiar with the resources that Melissa was talking about in the case body, how to develop a narrative, how to develop that protagonist, how to move the students, whether that's from a decision point or if it's a discussion-based case, how to do that. And also that equally important are instructor's notes. And so half the review process isn't even in the case body, it's with the instructor's notes. And so make sure technically you're getting this, that you're keeping modern information in here and you're giving the instructors and the students everything that they need in there. So next slide. Thank you. And so that's all I've got. I guess I could have put in thank you on my last slide. But yeah, thank you for your attention. Thank you for sitting through this. And I guess we'll look forward to any questions that you may have for the organizer and the panelists here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chris. I think there are a lot of useful pieces of advice in there. So from here, we're going to move into the question and answer section of our session. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And while I look through what we've received so far, now would be a great time to send in any questions you might have been thinking of over the course of the presentation. You can do this using the little control panel. It might be collapsed, so you can use the orange arrow to pop it back out. But while I'm doing that, we did actually receive a question over email yesterday from an author who is attending today. So they were wondering, as someone who is working on a case involving a highly successful world market leading organization, is it necessary to address something negative or a problem within the case? So I am interested in hearing if there is an alternative approach to crafting cases in this context, working with these kinds of organizations that can still contribute effectively to teaching and learning objectives without addressing problems or negative issues.
I would say it depends on the learning objectives. And so if the purpose of the student learning and the learning objectives that you've written is to look at maybe these positive aspects, the negative doesn't necessarily have to be a part of that case. With these large organizations, as I mentioned earlier, there's tons and tons and tons of stories. And so you could look at supply chains, you could look at human resources, you could look at a host of different topics. And so if it's not consistent with the objectives that you want to address with the case, I don't really see it necessary to add information that's going to detract from your goals and objectives.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple of questions that are asking similar things. So to summarize, can a case be hypothetical or must it be based on a real world business? Which I can speak towards, or if you want to, yeah. So to answer this question, yes, the case must be based on a real world scenario. Both the case journal and the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection do not accept fictional cases. So it's very important to us that you're working with these real world organizations and getting permission where necessary. Looking at the questions, another thing we have received just touches on the typical length of a traditional case study. So how long should cases be? Nowadays, students seem to have shorter attention spans. So what do you recommend as being kind of the most popular format for cases?
The compact cases, as Melissa mentioned, are sub 3,000 words. And if you haven't ventured into compact cases, this may be an interesting option for those short attention spans, because students can read them in class and respond even, or it doesn't take them as long to read. And so compact cases could be an option. Typical cases range anywhere from probably 3,000 to 10,000 words. 10,000 words is a lot for a reviewer and a student to go through, but it really depends on what you want to accomplish. So if it's a semester-long assignment, you may need more words to get through that. In terms of a 90-minute teaching case study that could be easily adapted by someone else, I mean, 3,000 to 6,000 is usually the range of most cases are falling in. Just anecdotally speaking, I don't know exactly where they are, but that seems to be around where they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that, definitely. There is someone in the chat who is asking how to teach a case in an MBA class. So perhaps, do you have any advice for someone who's looking to become more confident in presenting cases in their classroom?
Yeah, I mean, the best thing to do is just jump out there and do it. When you've got the cases with the case journal, we've got the instructor's manuals. So you've got someone who's taught the course already and is providing you with the guidance on how to do it. And so as you're putting together your teaching strategy, take that teaching strategy, it's there. A lot of the content should be there for our better cases. The literature should be there, and then just work in how to adapt it to your class. And so it may be someone, I know, for instance, I've taught courses. I'm putting together instructor's manual now for a case that I've taught online, and so I'm also putting in instructions for how to teach this in seat. And so you may have some of these back and forth depending on modalities, but I mean, the easiest way to do it is just to look at the teaching notes, figure out how they did it, and then to see what works for you in terms of your teaching style and what you have laid out through the term.
Okay, thank you. And I think my internet fuzzed for a second there, so I missed part of the response, but I would also add, and I hope you didn't touch on this also, but on the Emerald Cases Hub, which is one of the resources I shared in my slides, we do also have a course on teaching cases. So it will walk you through some helpful tips and tricks in order to do that. And as I mentioned, the Hub is a completely free platform, so all you need to do is register an account and you'll get access to that and all the other resources as well. We have another question that's I'm confused about the past tense. Do you mean that the case should be written in the past tense entirely?
Yes, yes, it should be. It is difficult to do, as I mentioned during the presentation, especially when there's things you're talking about that are modern. But you can use, if something absolutely has to be in present tense, you can use quotes. And so, especially for your primary cases where you're interviewing and you're transcribing those quotations from your protagonist, those can be in present tense because that statement's in the here and now, but the remainder should be in past tense. The one caveat is that the instructor's manuals don't have to be in past tense, and so you can write those in present tense, so you don't have to go through that struggle for both documents, just the body of the case.
Okay, thank you. I do also see a lot of these on the emerging markets studies collection as well, with submissions not being written in the past tense. So it is important, just give it another look before submitting. Another question we have is, if the case is based on a real business, do the characters have to be identifiable to existing roles / characters? Which maybe that is getting at the act of disguising information in a case?
Well, it would just depend on, Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong, if they have permissions to use the identities, then, and there's no ethical reasons not to use the identities, I would say it's okay. Some institutions, I know in the US, are going to have IRBs where you would need permissions, and so they would want you to disguise the characters. They may not, but in terms of if we have permissions, it would be okay from the journal standpoint. Is that correct, Melissa?
Yes, that's definitely correct.
Just want to make sure.
So just no worries. Just to make sure, or to expand upon the process for disguising information in your case, if you are, working with an organization that wants names changed for the characters or whatnot, you are able to do that. We understand that sometimes in order to get consent or permission, that is something that might be required of you, especially if you're dealing with sensitive information. So if you are disguising any information from names, locations, anything under the sun, we do ask that you disclose this to us in your teaching note. So under your research method section, you should say, I have disguised this information, but I have consent of the organization and they are approving this draft that I am submitting to the publication. Let me just scan down the other questions. We've received a lot, which is great, but filtering through them is a little. Okay, we've gotten a couple that are touching on primary versus secondary data. If writing using secondary data-based cases, it can become difficult to frame a strong dilemma. How can we help work on this?
One of the, and a point I meant to make in the presentation but didn't make here, was that you can, and one of the things I encourage a lot of authors to do is think about how you can use an organization as a protagonist. So that's what a lot of the better secondary cases are doing. And so you don't have some of the insights into what the actors behind the scenes, so what the leadership teams are doing, but you can see what the organization's doing. And so if you can frame the organization almost as the protagonist, this may help you to move more to a decision that the organization has to make that may not be as obvious in terms of some of the decision makers. With social media now, we're seeing a lot more cases that are getting creative with how they grab content from potential protagonists within those organizations. And so get creative. So look at the interviews, look at social media at some of the folks who are in these organizations, and they may provide some guidance on how to get to that dilemma or decision point a little bit better than just writing about the organization itself. And so try to give life to some protagonists, even if that's an organization acting more as a protagonist, I would say.
Okay, thank you. I think that's helpful. And just while we're on the note of secondary data versus primary data, I'll take it as an opportunity to answer a question that I receive a lot, which is yes, both TCJ and the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection do accept cases based on either secondary or primary data. So you're welcome. If you are using secondary, you do not require consent from the organization because we're assuming everything is publicly available already. And if you are using primary, in that instance, you do require consent or permissions from whatever organization you are working with. Hopping topics here. Is it necessary to add theory in case studying in the case study and teaching notes? So perhaps that's an opportunity to expand upon the importance of this in the case.
In the case, we've come to expect theory and practice discussions in the teaching notes or the instructor's manuals, and so we do want to see engagement with the literature and the modern literature. And so one of the components that's oftentimes missing is the modern literature. And so I wouldn't necessarily say it has to be theoretical. And so some of the literature you're writing toward may be more practical. And so, but more and more, we're seeing authors that are writing with theory, and we're seeing reviewers and editors as well wanting to see more engagement with the relevant theory and relevant practice. And that's the purpose is to make sure that your case is timely, and also that you're given all the resources needed to teach that case to those who would adopt it. And so the more info you can give them, the better.
Thank you very much. And my internet is getting a little spotty with audio. So we still have 8 minutes left. So if I, for some reason, disappear, my colleague Marcella is in the background. So hopefully she'll be able to step in and keep fielding questions. But it seems to be fine right now. So another question we've received is, should the teaching note provide various independent tasks to work with or build upon each other? So I think this is touching on sample questions versus activities or any kind of extra material that might be included. Can you speak towards that?
Yeah, it just depends on what you want to accomplish. And so if the students are going to need to do some kind of an exercise to answer questions, then absolutely include it. And that would be in the teaching notes. And so you can even write learning objectives toward that activity. And so that's the one caveat to writing learning objectives that can all be addressed by the case bodies. If you have some kind of activity in the teaching notes that students need to go through in order to meet those objectives. Now, the format of the case journal is that we have our learning objectives in the instructor's manual, so that doesn't really create any friction. But absolutely, if you've got an exercise, include that as a lead up to answering your discussion questions would be perfectly okay. I've done this several times. I mentioned I work with climate change and climate, and so I'll have students pull climate data and analyze climate data in order to answer questions from time to time. And so I've written cases where students have to go through the process of locating, analyzing in order to answer some of the questions that are relevant to the case and the protagonist. And so I would absolutely encourage those. Anything that's innovative, any type of exercises or additional pedagogical innovations you can add in there, it's going to make your case stand out even more. Because we are looking at the instructor's manuals just as closely as the case bodies, and so maybe that's where your case shines a little bit more and gets the favor of the reviewers and the editor team.
Thank you very much. We've also gotten a question that I believe I can answer. So the question is, can we add cartoons as a supplement to the case as it helps visual learners as an addition to the instructor's manual? And the answer to that is yes, you can add cartoons and other visuals. We are able to publish that kind of multimedia content, and it is actually very good for engagement, like you say. People like seeing these types of cases, and we would love to receive more of them. Another question we've received, oh, it just scrolled away from me. Things. Please pop it into the chat. Can you state the difference between teaching and learning objectives, and which has the higher value?
So learning objectives are what you want the students to learn, and as a teacher, it's what you're going to teach. We value learning objectives. I hadn't heard about teaching objectives until I wrote for a different case outlet. So I had to kind of teach myself what they were. And so learning objectives, though, are focused on the students, what you want them to do, and as teaching objectives is what you want to teach the students. Oftentimes you will use comparable Bloom's verbs to craft both of these, but one's going to be focused on your students, and one's going to be focused on you as a teacher and what you want to accomplish.
Perfect, thank you. And we received another question about how to handle exhibits, especially if they are long. Do they count towards the case? Should they be in URL links, etc.? So I can speak towards that one a little bit. So first, I would say, please do review the author guidelines for whichever publication you're hoping to submit to, because they will typically outline how this will be handled in your submission file to their preference. At Emerald, the exhibits are very welcome in the case. We typically see them included at the end, and they don't, a lot of publications will say you should include or expect to include about 200 or so words per exhibit, but cases are a little bit more flexible than that. If you have supplemental files, those are very welcome as well to include in your submission, or if you're linking to something that exists on a hosted web page already as just like a reference material, that is fine. But if you have a more specific question about what you're working with and how to include it, you can always reach out to us, and we can help, you know, on a case by case basis to see what would be the best thing to do there. Just checking through everything else. I have seen a question about language. So on the case journal and the emerging markets case studies collection, I'm afraid we are currently only accepting submissions in English, and they have to be unpublished elsewhere. So if they've, you know, gone through another publisher, they've received a DOI, I'm afraid we won't be able to consider those. We've gone through a lot so far, but I'm hoping we can do one more. I'm just looking through. So if you are looking for more resources after this presentation, we have shared the slides as a resource that you were able to download. We'll also share the presentation afterwards so you can look at specific sections of this later on, but I would recommend checking out the Emerald Cases Hub because it does include a number of courses on writing, using, and learning with case studies, in addition to a bunch of written resources such as templates for your teaching note that provide all the headlines you might need, and you can just pop your own sections into our kind of ideal format, as well as revision resources, sample cases, which can be great to help you compare how another author did something successfully, and past webinars as well. So that is definitely worth a look at, and it is go at your own pace, completely free resource. Okay, so we got through a lot of questions. I know there's still more that we didn't get to answer, so I will pick up on those after the session to see what we can do about them. But since we only have 1 minute left, I wanted to start wrapping up, and I wanted to give both of our panelists a second to share any closing remarks. So Chris, would you like to go first with any thoughts or suggestions for the audience?
Yeah, thanks again for attending and watching this, and send the cases in and become a reviewer for the case journal, especially if you become a reviewer and reach out to us. That's one of the best ways to learn, and come see us at the conferences if you're able to, because once you go through these workshops and have expert case writers working with you directly, the odds of you getting published go way up. And so come see us and ask questions if you have them along the way.
Thank you. And Teja, do you want to say anything to wrap us up?
I just want to thank you, Melissa and Emerald, for hosting this webinar. And well, I enjoy everybody, to submit cases for CEEMAN and Emerald case writing competition. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And for me, I'll just reiterate, best of luck if you're working on a case. We look forward to seeing your submissions. I hope you get the chance to participate in one of the competitions. And we've really enjoyed sharing our time with you today. So have a good rest of your day. And as soon as I wrap this up, the webinar will end for everybody. So take care. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.